I want to welcome you all to the History Center of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff. I think for many of you, it's probably your first visit in here. We are only 5.5 years old as a museum. We developed out of the Historical Society of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, which had its 50th anniversary in 2022. This museum is dedicated to telling not just the history of Lake Forest and Lake Bluff, but really exploring American history and using various stories as examples. Your family's example is a perfect example of that narrative and how we look at that. The settlement of the US, the way families developed and expanded. We have done this award for many years. We also do a Centennial Business Award some years, but I want to thank you all for participating and being part of this. Lori Stein, the Deputy Director here and Chief of Curation, has spent a lot of time doing research, meeting with family members, and her presentation hopefully will give you news that you didn't know about with your family and tie things together that you might not have tied together before. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lori.
Hey, so thank you all for joining us today, and for some of you for coming from further afield than just across town. So, as Carol said, the Centennial Family Awards celebrates families who lived in Lake Forest or Lake Bluff, and Lake Bluff potentially, for over 100 years. The program began back in 2006, and since then, we've honored 36 local families. The Brebner family this year will be the 37th. I always like to ask, is anyone here in the audience from a previous Centennial Family honoree? If so, raise your hands. Oh, good. Yeah, excellent. So this program, collaborating with local families, has always been one of my favorite things to work on here. And you know, what connects so many people to history isn't necessarily sort of all the grand and glorious moments, but what everyday life was like. So it's really important for us to collect these stories so they're there for the historians of the future, right? But it's also essential for us to share them with the community today. So we can all see how the stories of local families overlap and intersect, how they might diverge from and converge with each other and with our own past. So what I'm going to do today is use some photographs and stories that the Brebner family has been kind enough to share with us. So I will now give you a sketch of their history in Lake Forest and Lake Bluff. Okay, so we'll begin in Scotland, in farming country about 30 miles north of Aberdeen, which you can see noted there on the map. So the Brebner family historically was from a weaver clan, but they had been engaged in farming there for generations. So to give you a bit of a sense of where they came from, pictured you have a view of the farm in the Old Deer parish where William Brebner was a tenant, an image of the family plot and the cemetery near there, and a postcard of the nearby village of Maud. So William and Elsie Brebner had 4 children: Mary, John, who migrated to South Africa, Hugh, who became a schoolmaster at Peterhead Academy nearby, and Alexander William. It's his story that will follow. So neighbors of the Brebners in Old Deer Parish were the Simpsons, another farming family who had 9 children. So on June 3rd, 1907, Alexander William Brebner and Mary Simpson, who was called Polly and who we'll call Polly to distinguish from other Marys in the family, they were married that day, surrounded by friends and family members, as seen in the wonderful photograph here. And then below what you see is a copy of their entry into the local marriage register, which is really neat. Now their wedding also served as a sending off party, and a sending off party that was more than just like a honeymoon, because just days later, Alexander and Polly set off for the United States, arriving on our shores here on June 9th. So soon they would end up in Lake County in Illinois. So the couple joined what was really a wave of migrating Scots from their area of Aberdeenshire to our neck of the woods here. Having heard tell of neighbors and cousins who'd made the most of opportunities employing their expertise in the farming, building, and gardening trades in this part of Illinois. So the immediate draw for Alexander and Polly is that Polly's brother Arthur Simpson had come over the year before and had found work on a farm in Vernon Township. So here the picture you see is Arthur with his wife, Patricia, maiden name Philip, which is connected to other Phillips that we'll meet. And then their son Arthur Jr. or Bud. This is around 1910. Okay, so we'll get to see lots of really very cute baby pictures and pictures of young children today. So I'm glad there are so many kids here too. But anyway, just under a year after arriving in the US, Alexander and Polly's first child, Alexander Simpson Brebner, was born. He was often called Sandy by family and friends, and we'll refer to him that way as well to avoid confusion with all the other various Alexanders and Alex in the family. So as young Sandy was establishing himself in the world, his parents were establishing a place for themselves as well. And Alexander Brebner drew upon his many years of experience farming back in Old Deer in Scotland to secure a position as farm manager at Rodney Farms, which is just west of Libertyville. So if you look at the 1907 map there, you can kind of see exactly where that farm was located. It was, if you're familiar with the area, west of Butterfield Road and just north of where the same area of the Lake Seminary is today. So this dairy farm was owned by Rodney B. Swift, who is an attorney for the International Harvester Company and would later serve for many years in the Illinois State Senate. Eventually, 6 of Polly's 8 Simpson siblings would make their way across the pond from Scotland, with 4 of her siblings settling close to the Brebners in Lake County. So this really went a long way to creating sort of a sense of community, right, in a very new and very different place. So in this photo, taken, looks like, out at one of the farms where they were working, Polly is seated beside her sister Mabel, who had married William Phillip back in Scotland and come over in 1910. And Mabel is holding her small daughter Helen. Standing beside them is their sister-in-law Patricia Phillips Simpson, and as also a relation of Mabel's husband. And her husband William's brother James Phillip came over to the US shortly after as well. And so we start to see how this sort of chain migration of Scots to our area really helped to build our communities here. So in later years, William and Mabel Phillip resided and worked on the estate of the insurance executive and cattle breeder Bill Bartholomew, north of Libertyville. So Sandy Brebner, who's pictured here with his various parents, he spent his early childhood years in residence on the farms where his parents worked, first at Rodney Farms in Libertyville and then Thornhill Farm in Deerfield. And so he's with his mom there on the right or on the left, and then in some excellent overalls there with his dad on the right. He's standing right beside his uncle Alex Simpson, another Alex. And Alex Simpson worked for a time as the grounds caretaker of Alice Home Hospital, which was the local Lake Forest hospital for many years in the early days, which was located on the campus of Lake Forest College before the Lake Forest Hospital or Northwestern Inn was built. By 1930, Alex Simpson was managing the estate of Franklin P. Smith at 815 East Deer Path. So 1917 is the earliest known date that we know for sure the Brebners were living in Lake Forest. So by then, Alexander Brebner was hired away from his position in Deerfield by David B. Jones, you can see there on the left, to serve as superintendent of the farm and estate at Pembroke Lodge in Lake Forest. So there's another map there that shows where that was. The estate was located on the southwest corner of Deer Path and Green Bay Road, so like right across from where the new Veterans Memorial is. And at that time it extended all the way toward the Skokie River, so encompassing the land where Deer Path Junior High is now. And so from the picture on the right here, you can see one of the sort of magnificent westward views from a balcony at the estate. I mean, they had a good amount of land right there. So Pembroke Lodge is the name of the estate, and it was named for David B. Jones' birthplace in Pembrokeshire, Wales. And he was the chairman of Mineral Point Zinc Company. Was really considered one of the founders of the zinc industry in the US and in this area. Jones's daughter, Catherine, was married to the planner and architect Edward Bennett, one of the architects of the plan of Chicago. And they lived across the street on Deer Path from the Joneses. So for nearly a decade, the Brebner family lived and worked on the Jones estate. Various Simpson relatives would join them in working for the Jones family at Pembroke Lodge or for the Bennetts across the street at Bagatelle. So by now, the Brebner family had grown by one. Elsie Brebner, who is named for Alexander's mother, was born in 1915. And so here you can see some photos of her taken in the gardens on the estate, probably. So she's with her mother on top, feeling a little unsure about that puppy there on the left, and holding a teddy bear that's nearly as large as she was. And you know, this is the early days of teddy bears, right? They were named for Teddy Roosevelt and became popular after his presidency. So unfortunately, Elsie's life was sort of tragically cut short before she turned 4 years old. She contracted influenza, actually, right as the 1918 epidemic was sweeping its way through Lake Forest. And it disproportionately targeted here, as it did across the world, the young and healthy. And so she was one of at least 26 Lake Forest residents to die in the epidemic. And this is at a time when the population of the town was only about 3,200. So that's a pretty, pretty sadly large number. Elsie's obituary in the Lake Forester newspaper is really quite heartbreaking in its poignancy, especially given that over the past month of 1918, the newspaper had been printing far too many tributes like this, right? It says that, quote, for nearly 4 years, dear little Elsie has scattered brightness in the home of Mr. and Mrs. A.W. Brebner, but she was only lent, not given to the world, despite all that science and love could possibly do. So adding sort of further to the poignancy of this whole ordeal, Holly Brebner was more than 6 months pregnant when the family lost Elsie. So just a few short months later, baby Hugh was born. So you can see him pictured here with his parents, up on top of his brother and parents, and also with his aunt and cousin. So I want you to note the photo in the middle with the sailor suits, because we're gonna come back to this later in a bit. So, with the Great War and the influenza epidemic behind them in the 1920s, travel opportunities between the US and Europe were more open again. And the Brebners and Simpsons took advantage and visited family they'd only communicated with by letter for over a decade. So in 1922, Alexander, Polly, and young Hugh took an extended trip of several months to Scotland. You can see their passport photo right there. Later in the 1920s, the Lake Forester reported that Alex Brebner had a 2.5-month visit from his sister, Mary, who came over from Scotland. In 1923, Polly Simpson was reunited with her youngest sibling, Laura, when she migrated to the US with her husband, Albert Faulkner, and their young children, Ian and Flossie. So Albert found work as a gardener on a few different Lake Forest estates, including her fellow Scot, Donald McLennan, at Stornoway on Lake Roche. Flora worked as a telephone operator at the Illinois Bell Exchange on Deer Path. So needless to say, she always had the best story gossip of anyone in the family. Both of the Faulkner children had sort of quite dramatic wartime romances and weddings. Flossie married Joe Meade in 1944. He was actually the stepson of Edward H. Bennett, for whom Flossie's family members had worked in prior years at his estate, Bagatelle. And then later that year, her brother Ian, then First Lieutenant Ian Faulkner, married First Lieutenant Lorraine Rages. Ian had been stationed in the Aleutian Islands as part of the Army Anti-Aircraft Weapons Division. And he met his wife there, who was serving in the Army Nurse Corps at the time. In 1930, the Lake Forest reported that Polly Brebner was pleasantly surprised when her brother James who was living in Vancouver and whom she had not seen for 26 years, made an unexpected visit. And so 7 of the 9 Simpson siblings were gathered for a reunion at Thanksgiving. So you can see them all reunited and pictured in this great photo here. They're sort of largely suitably dressed for that early snow, although I'm not really sure about the women's shoes, but they're they have putting a good face on it at least. By 1924, Alexander and Polly Brebner had saved enough to purchase a home of their own in Lake Forest and move off the Jones estate. And 1080 Griffith, which is pictured here on either side in the 1940s, and then again in the middle more recently, remained in the family as the family home for several decades. The Brebner children appreciated the sense of community in their new neighborhood, which featured several school classmates. Sandy Brebner attended Halsey and then Norton School in town. And then for high school, he took the North Shore electric train down to Deerfield Shields High School in Highland Park. So here you can see his senior photo from the yearbook in 1926. His quote was, "What man dare, I dare." Though in school, Sandy Brebner was largely sort of focused on like intramural and class sports, he was very athletic and he excelled in competitions of all kinds. He bowled and played ping pong and baseball. He was a member of the Young Men's Club basketball team, which competed up and down the North Shore against other towns. And is pictured right there on the cover of the Lake Forester. Where he really stood out though was on the golf course. You can see several of his golf trophies in the corner over there. He won the Deer Path Golf Club Championship in 1930 and really was in the running most other years. In fact, he was around Deer Path so much that after graduating from high school in the early 30s, he secured a job as a golf supply salesman. So regularly joining Sandy Brebner on the basketball court, on the baseball field, at the golf links, were members of the Baldwin family. 3 of the Baldwin brothers pictured here were on that Young Men's Club basketball team from the cover of the newspaper. So the Baldwins are another of Lake Forest Centennial families. We honored them with the same award back in 2011. And the Baldwin family was part of a migration, so the first from the south of Ireland near Cork and Waterford to St. John's, Newfoundland, which was growing at the time due to the fishing industry. And then finally to Lake Forest by 1891 to join the growing construction trade here. So many Baldwin family members built homes in the southeast part of town, like near Washington Road, Cherry, Woodlawn, Ryan Place, that area. With so many residents from Newfoundland, the neighborhood quickly became known as Codfish Town, since on Friday evenings, the scent of codfish cooking wafted through the air. So Edward Baldwin, pictured here, had his own plastering business, and he lived with his wife Mary on Woodlawn. And so with no less than 13 children, you can see why there were enough Baldwins to make up half the basketball team, right? So Adeline, called Ad Baldwin, was the 3rd youngest to the family, and she recalled getting to know Sandy Brebner because he was always over at their house. Ostensibly, I suppose, to hang out with her brothers, at least at first, right? So by 1935, Adeline and Sandy decided to get married. It was not the simplest of propositions, though. For one, it was the height of the Depression, not a time for a big fancy wedding. But more challenging still was the matter of religion. The Baldwins were Irish Catholics and the Brebners Scottish Presbyterians. So a church wedding seemed out of the question. The pair resolved the issue by eloping in Crown Point, Indiana. Believe it or not, at this time, Crown Point served as sort of the Las Vegas, or I suppose Gretna Green, if you're Scottish, of the Midwest. So Indiana, unlike all the states surrounding it, did not require a 5-day-long waiting period between getting a marriage license and getting married. So border towns in Indiana, like Crown Point, attracted young couples or old couples from other states who were in a hurry or just wanted a simpler process, like Sandy and Adeline. So one of the things that drew Ad and Sandy Brebner together was that she was an accomplished athlete as well. I suppose with so many brothers, she had to be. But she played basketball as a girl and could match him swing for swing on the golf course. She regularly competed for the women's championship at Deer Path, winning in 1946 and 1949. I can only imagine they must have had a display case, or maybe they pitted all their trophies against each other. But anyway, here you can see her first at Deer Path with her sister Peg and a friend there on the left. And then on the right, this is a fun one. You can see her, she's dressed up for the annual ladies' costume party at Deer Path in 1939. If you look closely, you can see it appears that she borrowed her costume from her husband. Not to be outdone, in 1942, Sandy Brebner carded an impressive round, turning in what the newspaper called a smashing 65 to set the Deer Path record for amateurs. With his brother-in-law, Pat Baldwin, as one of the witnesses, he shot 5 birdies. And this record actually remained in place for years. You can see his scorecard, his fruit, right here. So when they teamed up, Sandy and Adam Brebner were a formidable duo. And in 1949, you can see they won a $200 prize at the mixed doubles bowling tournament in town. Then in the photo below, you can see the enormous sailfish they caught on a 1960 trip to Marathon Island in the Florida Keys. One day, several weeks after the trip, they received an enormous package in the mail. Their friends had mounted one of the fish for them as a trophy and sent it along. The Brebners, however, did not have wall space, like even close to being adequate for such a prize. So they eventually donated it and had it put up in the American Legion Hall, where everyone could see their accomplishment, I suppose. So such athletic pursuits would serve Adeline Brebner well, because she was about to become, I suppose, what we might today refer to as a boy mom. So her son, Alexander William, known as Bill, was born in 1940, and Thomas Baldwin, Tom, followed in 1943. And spoiler alert, in the 1950s, there would be 2 more. So this super cute photograph, which I was happy to find, was printed in the Lake Forester in 1944. The caption said, Tommy is 10 months and has a quiet, placid disposition. I don't know if that was always true, but he has light brown hair and blue eyes and can walk about in his playpen. His favorite toy is an old rag doll. And Bill is just the opposite. So he talks continually and pedals about on his tricycle, which has been his pride and joy since his 2nd birthday. So fortunately for the Brebners, they were supporting this growing family on a more stable salary than that of a Gulf Supply salesman. So in 1933, Sandy was hired as a patrolman by the Lake Forest Police Department. He told the story that dozens of local men had applied for this open position, given that there weren't many at the time anywhere in the Depression, and he was awarded the job, being one of the only applicants to have graduated from high school. But he was also, even among the seasoned officers, one of the best target shooters in the department. You can see from articles like that. So let's see, here you can see a picture right at the lower right with the rest of the police force at the time, shortly after it started in the 1930s. So Frank Tiffany was the new police chief at the time, and he was known for his efforts to improve technology and communication in the department. In the early 30s, he worked to get access to radios for the department's squad cars. However, these early radios transmitted one way only. If officers on the beat needed to get in touch with anyone, they had to stop and find the nearest telephone box and call in. So given that Lake Forest was a particularly spread out city, with the annexation of West Lake Forest in 1926, the land area of the whole town had tripled. Tiffany was eager to improve this sort of inefficient system, right? So in 1933, the same year that Sandy Brebner started on the force, Lake Forest installed an innovative 2-way radio system in the patrol cars, and they were actually the 2nd community in the entire country to try this out, and it ended up working really well. The newspaper photo here with Sandy Brebner seated and Chief Frank Tiffany standing at the right is from 1948, and this is after the department completed the installation of a new frequency modulation radio tower. So this was in compliance with the FCC switch to FM radio, which happened at the time. In 1938, in an effort to keep up with some of the most modern policing methods, the department sent Sandy Brebner to an FBI training academy in Washington, D.C. So this was a 3-month course, and it included instruction in crime detection techniques, fingerprinting, laboratory work, that sort of thing. He later spoke with pride about meeting J. Edgar Hoover and other well-known agents at the time. So Ad Brebner also accompanied him to Washington, and they resided for a few months in an apartment in Georgetown with some of the other course attendees. On one occasion, the wives ventured over to the White House just to see if they could have a tour, maybe not. And because President Roosevelt was out of town, he was staying at his house in New York, the ladies were nearly able to have the run-in of the place. They just went right in, which is a far cry, I think, from a tour today, but fun for them, I'm sure. Upon returning to Lake Forest, Sandy Brebner led a series of training sessions for other members of the department, and teaching them some of the things he learned about crime statistics, report writing, fingerprinting, criminal description, public relations, and the laboratory, all of that. So around this time, the Brebners had another run-in with well-known persons of the period. During the Depression years, they took roomers into their house to supplement their income. And sometimes these were students at local schools. In the late 1930s, Jack Hemingway, the son of Hadley Richardson and well-known author Ernest Hemingway, boarded with the Brebners for a few months while attending Lake Forest High School. His mother, who had divorced Hemingway in 1927, then remarried to Paul Maurer, Chicago Daily News correspondent, the two of them were building a house in Shore Acres in Lake Bluff, but they decided to have Jack board locally so he could start the school year before the house was finished. So speaking of school, while Sandy Brebner was starting a family and advancing his career, his brother Hugh, who was 11 years younger, was going through school at Gordon. His mother Holly was on the PTA. You can see him pictured here with his 7th grade class in 1932, seated at the lower left, sporting some truly impressive Argyle socks, so stylish and appropriate to his Scottish heritage. He started high school at Deerfield Fields in Highland Park like his brother, but as a junior made the switch to the brand new Lake Forest High School, which had opened in 1935. So he was part of the second class to graduate from LFHS in 1937. At the time, some of the budding high school journalists wrote a column, Did You Know That?, with notes and observation about the school and its inhabitants that was sometimes printed in the Lake Forester. And so one of these we found contained a line about Hugh. It says, Hugh Brebner tried awfully hard to raise a mustache this last week, but all was in vain. No, not that time. In 1941, even prior to Pearl Harbor, much of the country was moving on to war footing. And midway through the year, Hugh Brebner enlisted in the Army, joining many of his Brebner, Simpson, Faulkner, and Baldwin cousins and uncles with a record of service. And so the photos here are from training at Camp Walls in Texas and Camp Edwards in Massachusetts. You can also see a letter he wrote to the editor of the Lake Forester, where he mentions how much he appreciated being sent the local news from the hometown paper. So in 1943, he was promoted from private to corporal and sent overseas, where he saw action in North Africa and Italy. In Italy, he was a member of an anti-aircraft gun battalion on Anzio Beach. By 1945, as sort of the war front coalesced in Germany, there were lots of accounts in the paper of hometown encounters overseas, right? And so there was a note from the paper that deep in the fighting in Germany, Hugh Brebner met up with Sergeant Leonard Baldwin. The one thing the paper doesn't mention, maybe because the writer didn't have time to untangle the confusing relational, generational ties that can occur in a family with 13 children, like the Baldwins, was that he met up with his uncle, Len, in Germany, his mother's younger brother. By late 1945, after the E-Day, longer furloughs for service members grew more common, and he was able to take an extended trip across Europe to visit two of his uncles in Scotland. So after he was discharged, Hugh Brebner returned to Lake Forest, and where he worked for a fellow Scot, George Robertson, at Robertson's Men's Store. So here you can see an interior view of the location at 276 East Deer Path. So George Robertson's also pictured in the photo above. He's circled right next to Ad and Sandy Brebner. And it looks like Hugh was in the photo too, but the photographer maybe cut him off or something right at the end. In 1954, Hugh and a friend from the Army bought the Shore Club Hotel in Lake Geneva, which is pictured there at the bottom left, and ran it for many years. They remodeled the large front porch into a restaurant dining room, and the place enjoyed a reputation for good food and dining with a wonderful view of the lake. So it was located on the site where the Geneva Inn is today. So Hugh and Sandy Brebner's parents, Alexander and Polly Brebner, continued living on Griffith Road in the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. Alexander had been ordained and installed as a deacon in First Presbyterian Church in 1922 and served there for years as a deacon and elder. So here you can see a few family photos where he's enjoying family time with his new young grandsons. After the death of David B. Jones in the 1920s, Jones's daughter Gwethelyn continued to run the estate for a time, but after a while, some of the property was subdivided, like many estates in Lake Forest. Alexander Brebner worked as a landscape gardener for a few other Lake Forest estates, including by the 1940s for the Rebels at 506 Washington. In the course of his work there, he had an incident where he fell off a roof and broke his leg, and apparently after that, his health was never quite the same. In 1946, he died at the age of 68 and was buried at Lake Forest Cemetery. Polly Brebner continued to live on Griffith with her son Hugh, and she'd been on the board of Lake Forest Women's Club in the 30s and continued with that club for years. Gatherings with her extended Simpson clan also went on through the 40s. So here you can see a photo of the 5 Lake County Simpson siblings on top, and a snapshot of the extended clan on the right, probably taken at a family reunion at Bud Simpson's farm, which was north of downtown Long Grove. So Polly Simpson is standing in the front below the arrow, and Ad and Sandy are partially obscured behind her. And I think Bill and Tom are somewhere sprawled in the front with the other children. So Polly Brebner passed away in 1855. Before that time, though, Polly was able to meet 2 more new grandchildren, both at once. In 1952, Sandy and Ad Brebner welcomed twins, Dennis and Richard Brebner, to the family. So here you can see the twins pictured wearing a very sweet pair of sailor suits. Sailor suits that on closer examination look like, I mean, look at those, look like the exact same ones worn by their Uncle Hugh and his cousin William Phillip in the 1920s. So Polly Brebner must have saved those and passed them on, and this was the perfect opportunity to break them out. So here's another fun photo from when the twins were small and all bundled up, playing outside in their backyard. In the mid-50s, the Brebners moved into Sandy's parents' house at 1080 Griffith Road. This photo is great because it's accompanied by a descriptive caption from Dennis's son Chris. That must have been part of like a family history school project in the 1980s. And he notes that Uncle Richard looks like my baby sister. So I'm not sure which sister that is, but I thought that was cute. Through the 1940s and 1950s, Sandy Brebner advanced in rank through the Lake Forest Police Department. He was promoted to police lieutenant in 1941 and the captain in 1951. He did a lot of the communication with journalists, and so his name often pops up as a source in articles like that one on the right there, in reference to a large jewel theft that took place at a dinner party on Woodland Road in 1944. I don't know if they ever recovered that. I have to keep looking into it. But in 1951, to the photo on the top left, he was on duty to help direct traffic in crowds during General Douglas MacArthur's parade from Chicago up the North Shore to Milwaukee upon MacArthur's return from Korea. So you can see Sandy Brebner sort of incidentally in the background of this press photo of MacArthur. In 1956, Sandy Brebner was appointed chief of the Lake Forest Police Department, succeeding Frank Tiffany, who served for 25 years. And his kids recall both benefits and drawbacks to being children of the chief of police. On the one hand, all the town news was quickly known to the police force and their families. They could stop by and visit their dad in his office on the northeast corner of the police station, where Lake Colonial is now, overlooking Market Square. The fire department was there too then, and sometimes you could tour the upstairs firefighter dorms and slide down the fire pole, so that's all fun. On the other hand, the job was 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, like many in that era, and Sandy Brebner took his job very seriously. He wore his uniform to and from the station. Sometimes it seems like he was on duty sort of 24/7. You know, emergencies would arise on nights and weekends. And then even on days off, Chief Brebner thought nothing of stopping people just while in casual clothes after if they committed an egregious traffic violation right in front of him, right? So I can picture it, you know, like, Dad, I need to go practice, you know, sorry, they just, you know, rolled right into the second stop sign in a row, like, can't have that. It was also at the time a well-known Lake Forest story that in the 1950s, he ticketed two-time presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson for speeding through Lake Forest. Stevenson lived in Libertyville, but often took the train downtown from Lake Forest, and so wanted, I suppose, to get back to Libertyville in a hurry. He was the man from Libertyville, right? So this photo and article is kind of a neat discovery we made as a result of conducting research about the Brebners. So that photo is part of the police department records in the History Center collection. Beyond the fact that Chief Brebner is pictured on the right, we didn't really have any specific information about what's going down here. But in the course of our research, we uncovered the news article on the left from the Chicago Tribune, in which Sandy Brebner is interviewed about a Lake Forest burglary, which took place at the home of Colonel Robert Morse at 1299 Northwood Circle. And the alleged thieves took 12 cases of liquor and 4 slot machines from the basement recreation room. So they were caught after, unfortunately, they sampled some of the 25-year-old scotch on the trip back to Chicago. So they were driving erratically with no taillights on. But I recall looking at this photo and wondering what was on the table, or was underneath the table, under the whiskey. But it's clearly the slot machines, which is so interesting. So with all this, Sandy Brebner did make some time to keep up with his golf game, whether at Deer Path is pictured above or at other local courses. He was often invited to participate in the Children's Memorial Pro-Am fundraiser at the Enmuncia Club, which was held following the Western Open PGA tournament. And they wanted locals like with some skill, right, to pair with the pros. So here you can see him with golfer Jim Stockton, who's on the left. So though the skill at golf didn't totally pass down to the next generation, the boys grew up around it. Bill and Tom played, here shown participating in the Lake Forest Recreation Department's winter golf session in the 1950s. The two both caddied at Deer Path. Their younger brothers, Dick and Dennis, later were caddies at Enmuncia. And in addition to caddying, Bill and Tom also both worked as valets for private parties and clubs, and also got gigs driving cars to and from winter homes in Florida. Fun. So this is another fun photo that we found in the History Center collection that has members of the Brebner family pictured. So the costume party at Gordon in about 1958. It doesn't seem to be Halloween given the lack of like warm layers on most of the kids, but that's not always the best barometer, so I guess it could be. But anyway, Dick and Dennis Brebner are both part of the fun. They're dressed up identically as Popeye, I think. Complete with pipes and everything. And I mean, they both, they didn't lose the pipes, they still have them. It's pretty amazing. So the Brebners attended Lake Forest schools, and this was in the period where the town was switching over from Halsey and Gordon to Deer Path and Sheridan schools, right? All 4 graduated from Lake Forest High School. So here you can see Dennis and Richard's 1970 senior yearbook photos. In addition to caddying, the pair also both worked as park rangers for the Lake County Forest Preserve. And then the lower photo shows them together off at college. intently concentrating, I suppose, during a rush at the University of Illinois. Then we have this great series of photos that the Brebners took together at their house on the occasion of Bill's wedding in 1967. He married Cheryl Thomas, who lived on Center Avenue in Lake Bluff, and was at First Presbyterian. Then just a year later, we have this one with all four brothers from Tom's wedding, in 1968 at St. Mary's. He married also a local woman, Josephine Ford, who had grown up in Lake Forest on Laurel. And Tom continued the Scottish tradition of working at Robertson's men's store in Lake Forest. He was there for 20 years. So this one is from Dennis's wedding to Maureen in 1981. And Dennis went to law school and founded the law firm Robinson and Brebner, later Dennis Brebner and Associates. Locally, he and Maureen and their four kids, Chris, Ryan, Laura, and Elizabeth, lived first on Oakwood in a house that was owned also by his brother Dick, and then on Witchwood for many years in Lake Bluff. And so here's a great 1990s photo of Dick's wedding with Nancy Ellen Bays in 1993, which showcases also family members from the next generation. Dennis and Maureen's children became the third generation of the family to graduate from Lake Forest High School, dating back to their great uncle Hugh in just the school's second year, 1937. So I always like to conclude with a few recent family photos. So this one shows Laura's wedding to Charles Robbins III. And then here is a family gathering from 2022 when they celebrated, I think, from the cakes, both Maureen and Dennis's wedding anniversary and the twins' 70th birthday in Lake Bluff at the house in Witchwood. So the photo on the top right shows the fifth generation of the Brebner family to live in our communities of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff, right? That's Charles Robbins IV, right up there. So that's a legacy dating back more than a century. All right, so Dick Brebner, again, who helped prepare the nomination, wanted to say a few words, so I will pass it along to you.
Great, thank you very much. That was fantastic, Lori. Let me introduce myself. We saw the pictures. I'm Richard Brebner. I'm one of the Adeline's four kids. I don't know if I'm the oldest one. Well, actually, I'm older, but Tom's still around, but he was on South Carolina, so he couldn't show up for the night, but he knows all about it, and he's very excited about what's going on. I want to open up by thanking Lori and the History Center of Lake Forest, Lake Bluff. This is, we need to thank them for all the efforts they put in, all the stuff they do here, and what a wonderful thing this is for the community to have such experts working on stuff like this. So just really quick comments by the Brebner family. I would say I was proud and grateful to have grown up to live in Lake Forest. That my parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, they loved everything about Lake Forest. It was a beauty. They like its beauty. It was like a nice small town with country charm, and it has the wonderful thing, the distinct four seasons, which we enjoyed by doing things and not just sitting in the house. I would say that my memories of growing up in Lake Forest were my main memory I want to express here was that everybody was happy. It seemed like it was a happy place to live. Like you hardly ever, I never ran into people, they didn't smile and say, well, I looked a little bit like a Brebner and a Baldwin, so they would confuse that. But they say, you're one of the Brebners, right? Or you're one of the Baldwins, or you're Bill's little brother, or you're Tom's little brother, or you're Sandy's twins. It was, I never had anybody say anything but that right away. And I felt like I really belonged. When we'd walk around, there's no place where you could walk, so you didn't actually, or bike. So you didn't have to even get in a car. You would just walk around town, walk to baseball, walk to school. In the summer, everybody sat on their porches. It seemed like a lot of the homes in towns had, smaller, large screen porches, and people would sit there and they, say stuff to you, yell hi to you as you walk by. And sometimes you walk up and stand there and talk to them, or they'd invite you in. People had their windows open and you could hear people having dinner and talking and chatting with each other. And I would say my parents knew who lived in every house, so they'd say, oh, they would know who was in there talking. I didn't learn all the names like they knew them. Lake Forest, Lake Forest was great, had great parks, beautiful beach, the rec center, festivals, street dances in the summer. Even there, which had have live music, there was no DJs, I remember. You could hear the live music from the clubs or from the debutante parties. So you'd sometimes just think, oh, I hear music. I think I'll just walk to the sound and see what's going on. And that's where my brothers would sometimes valet park their cars. They were older than me. I would love to valet park the cars, but they wouldn't trust me. So, and of course, Lake Forest had great schools. There were the schools. It was cool because they had a college. So we went to college concerts. You know, they had like local rock bands. They used to have this kind of a beat up old field house. They played basketball in there. So we'd go see basketball games, football games. I remember even as I got a little bit older, I'd go to college. They had like the top handball team in the country, which was unbelievable. So I would go down there and watch them play handball and actually took up the game. Never got any good at it, but they encouraged me to play a little handball. It was a town, besides being happy, it was out like, my memory is really like around the country. There was some, just north of us across the tracks on Western, some people, there were still farms there. There were like little goats and sheep and chickens. And we'd go in there. Most of it, except for where they had animals, nothing was fenced or locked. I mean, I got used to like not being surprised that doors were locked. I had to get used to the doors were locked. I mean, you just went to somewhere and pulled on the door and it would just swing open. And we probably, everybody had shortcuts. Like if you're gonna go point A to point B, you would never actually follow the sidewalk. You'd often just run through the backyards or cross, parks and things like that. We just wonder a story about nothing being fenced or locked. When my brother and my uncles worked at Robertson's, they would actually have like, people would buy a suit or have it tailored. And they would, but this is what I heard. I never did this, but they would actually get a call saying, oh, I need to have these 2 suits pressed. Can you come get them and press them and then bring them back? So the Robertson's guy was Ray Green, would drive the Robertson's van to the house, walk in the back door, go upstairs, go open the closet, get the suit out, the 2 suits, bring it back to Robertson's, press them, and then take them back and hang them in the closet. I mean, they were just like, people just walked right into your house without, obviously they were invited, but, fortunately, the Brebner family still lives here, and the ones that don't are still proud to call themselves Lake Foresters. I actually follow Lake Forest on Facebook and some other stuff. My wife hears all about it because it's always going on. I saw they won the lacrosse state championship their day, so I don't play lacrosse, but so the Brebners and Simpsons, right? I mean, I think one part of this that came through, it was a great job, Lori, was that Brebners and Simpsons were proud of their Scottish heritage and really tried to stay in touch and continue the Scottish, traditions a little bit. And I would say that I think the Lake Forest must have reminded them of the Scottish Highlands, just the farms and the beauty, maybe it was more trees here probably, but it's a beautiful place. So in closing, I want to say that there's a famous Scottish poet, Robert Burns, who one time said, wherever I wander, wherever I rove, the hills of the Highlands forever I love. And I'm gonna alter that to say the same thing: wander or rove, the Lake Forest, Lake Forest, a place forever I will love. And I'm sure all the Brebners and Simpsons still have a love for Lake Forest to this very day. Thanks very much for this wonderful event.